If you're new here, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment down below. What would you do if a ruler who owns entire star systems noticed someone like you? Someone with nothing. Tonight's story begins far from shining palaces, in a place where light itself feels borrowed. The sky over Kara's 9 was the color of rust. The mining colony never truly woke, it merely dragged itself through one endless gray day after another. Elias Vance walked the cracked walkway between the oxygen scrubbers, boots grinding on frost, the thin atmosphere biting at his cheeks. The air smelled like iron and stale oil. Everything here was leased: oxygen, water, shelter. Nothing belonged to anyone except the corporations that had long since abandoned their human faces. Elias owned nothing. Not a home. Not a future. Not even a name that mattered. A low rumble shivered through the ground. For a moment, Elias thought it was another drill collapse. Then the sky ignited gold. Every worker in the compound froze, their hands slick with grease and cold. Over the jagged horizon, an imperial dreadnought descended like a god carved from light. Its hull gleamed with polished alloys untouched by dust. It was not a supply ship. Not a patrol craft. It was the personal flagship of the Celestial Queen. Elias felt the colony stiffen around him, the way a hunted animal stiffens when the predator enters the clearing. Sirens blared. A voice barked over the intercom, clipped and metallic. All non-essential personnel to kneeling stations. Do not avert your gaze from the ground. This is an imperial presence. People obeyed. Kneeling was reflex here, ingrained through generations of subjugation. But Elias didn't move. The ship touched down with the grace of a falling star, displacing the brittle snow into swirling halos. Docking struts crushed the old concrete like paper. Armored envoys in black and gold poured out of the ship's ramp, their visors reflecting the colony's trembling faces. Behind them she emerged, the Celestial Queen, Serafina Valare. A name Elias had heard whispered in the cantina, half with awe, half with dread. Her arrival on a border colony was unprecedented. She was taller than he'd imagined, wrapped in layers of white and gold that shimmered like starlight. A diadem hovered a breath above her brow, not resting but floating as if gravity itself bowed to her. Elias should have looked away. Everyone else did. But something in him, a quiet, reckless streak that had outlived hunger, debt, and broken years, held firm. He stared straight at her. Her boots touched the ground. The air around her seemed to shift, the bitter wind softening, bending. She moved with practiced stillness, like someone who had never had to rush for anything in her life. One glance from her and seasoned guards straightened like steel rods. She didn't need to speak to rule. The colony foreman threw himself to his knees so fast Elias heard the bones crack. Your Radiance, the colony welcomes. She lifted a hand and the foreman fell silent, trembling under the weight of that single gesture. Her gaze swept across the kneeling crowd, detached, accustomed to worship. It slid past one bowed head after another, until it stopped. Elias didn't bow, didn't move, didn't pretend. The wind caught the edge of his work jacket, tugging at frayed seams. His hands were stained with iron dust, his hair stiff from cold. The Queen's eyes, pale like the edge of a dying star, narrowed slightly. Not in anger, something colder. Calculation. Her captain moved instinctively toward Elias, hand on the pulse rifle at his side. No, she said, and her voice carried like a cathedral bell. Do not touch him. The captain froze mid-step. Even the wind seemed to hush. Elias felt dozens of terrified eyes drilling into him. He should have dropped to his knees now, whispered an apology, begged to be ignored. Instead, he drew a slow breath through his cracked lips and stared back at her. What could she do? Kill him? He had nothing to lose. The thought didn't embolden him, it steadied him. She stepped closer. One measured stride, then another. The envoy formation split before her without a word. Up close, the shimmer of her robes revealed fine threads of light woven like living constellations. He saw the faint reflection of himself in the surface of her crown, a speck of rust against polished infinity. What is your name? She asked. Her words fell softly, but they reached every ear in the colony. No one spoke. Elias didn't want to give her his name because names could be owned. But silence would brand him a fool or worse. Elias Vance. No honorific. No Your Radiance. Just his name. Raw and plain. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A guard's finger twitched near his weapon. The foreman made a strangled sound. This kind of insolence didn't end with mercy. But Serafina didn't frown. Her lips curved almost imperceptibly. You do not kneel. No, Elias said. She tilted her head. Why? Elias thought of the cold, the debt, the endless digging for a corporation that no longer remembered their names. He thought of how every person here bent their back lower each year and died without ever touching something they could call theirs. He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I have nothing to kneel for." The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Even the foreman stopped breathing. A miner near the back whimpered softly. The guards tensed, prepared to drag him away. Then, softly like a blade drawn from silk, she said, "Interesting." She turned from him with a movement so fluid it didn't break her aura of quiet power. To the captain she said, "Bring him to me." The captain hesitated, as if unsure he'd heard correctly. "Your Radiance, he's a laborer." Her gaze flicked to him, a flash of frost. Did I stutter? The captain paled beneath his visor. "No, Your Radiance." Elias's heart thudded once, hard, not from fear but from the surreal pull of inevitability. The guards advanced, not with brutality but with ceremonial precision, as if escorting someone already chosen. The queen walked back up the ramp without looking to see if he followed. She didn't need to. When someone owned the stars they didn't ask. They commanded. Elias was led toward the glowing ramp, away from the colony that had never been his, into a ship so polished it reflected the stars like a mirror. The crowd kept their heads down. No one reached out. No one spoke. It was as if he'd already ceased to exist among them. As he crossed the threshold into the golden light of her flagship, the icy wind of Kara's 9 fell away. The air inside was warm, perfumed with something floral and alien. It smelled like wealth itself. He'd always imagined starships as cold machines. This one breathed like a palace. Elias glanced once over his shoulder at the rusted colony fading behind him. For the first time it looked small, fragile, forgotten. The queen's voice came from the upper steps, calm and certain. "Let us see, Elias Vance, what a man who owns nothing can offer a throne that owns everything." And in that single moment he understood. Whatever game he'd just been pulled into, it had no rules written for men like him. The throne chamber of the imperial flagship wasn't built for comfort. It was built for awe. Light flowed through crystalline arches, diffused into soft gold that made the floor gleam as if polished by centuries of reverence. The ceiling soared into shadows, the kind that made a man feel small whether he wanted to or not. Elias stood on the black onyx tiles with a dozen soldiers at his back, feeling the weight of an empire pressing down on him without a single hand touching him. At the far end of the chamber, Serafina Valere sat on her floating throne, a sculpted construct of light, metal and power that didn't quite touch the ground. She wasn't wearing a crown, she didn't need one. Authority wrapped around her like a second skin. No movement was wasted. No gesture unconsidered. She watched him with the calm precision of someone used to dissecting men without drawing blood. He hated how quiet the room was. No whispering, no rustling, only the low hum of the throne itself. Even the soldiers seemed to breathe less in her presence. She spoke first, voice smooth as glass. "Most men kneel when they see me." Elias met her gaze, steady. "I'm not most men." A murmur rippled through the chamber. 2 courtiers shifted uneasily, the weight of unspoken rules tightening around them. It was not a place where defiance was common. Serafina didn't frown. She leaned slightly forward, resting her chin on the back of her hand, as though examining something rare. "What are you then?" she asked. "Someone with nothing left to lose." Her lips parted, not quite a smile, not quite mockery. "That is dangerous. I've noticed." The air in the room sharpened, like the moment before a storm. Elias knew he was being measured, not for strength, not for status, but for the kind of truth that couldn't be bought. He didn't belong here and she knew it. That perhaps was why she'd brought him. Serafina straightened, and the throne adjusted its height with a soft hum, elevating her until her shadow fell across him. "Do you know who I am, Elias Vance?" "Everyone knows who you are," he said. "The queen who owns the stars." Her eyes flickered with something, annoyance or amusement he couldn't tell. "Titles are stories people tell themselves. But yes, I command fleets. I decide the rise and fall of nations. Men bow to me not because they want to, but because they must." He waited. She wanted him to react, to be awed, to be afraid. But fear had long been burned out of him. When everything you have is taken, what remains is a strange kind of freedom. Her gaze narrowed. "And yet you don't kneel." "I don't owe you my knees." This time the murmur was louder. One of the courtiers actually gasped. A guard shifted his grip on his weapon, though no order was given to use it. In a court where every word was scripted and rehearsed, Elias was a crack in the marble. Serafina raised a hand and silence returned like a tide. You speak like a man who believes he matters. I don't, Elias replied. But I'm still a man. For a heartbeat, her carefully curated expression faltered, not enough for the court to see but enough for him to notice. She'd spent her life surrounded by people who worshipped power, not humanity. To her, Elias was something foreign, something unpolished and alive. Why refuse what I offer? She asked, voice softening. Wealth can be yours. Right. A name etched into the archive stars. If you kneel, I can give you everything you've been denied. He almost laughed, though the sound caught in his throat. Everything? You can give me what I never wanted. Her eyes widened just a fraction. Few people dared mock her even gently. Yet she didn't strike him down. She leaned back instead, studying him with the same intent as one might study a dangerous but fascinating animal. She rose from the throne. The room seemed to tighten around her movement. She descended the steps slowly, robes whispering against the polished floor. Her soldiers stiffened at her proximity, but she ignored them, walking until she stood only a breath away from Elias. The light haloing her face made her seem less human, more idea. You should be afraid of me, she said quietly. I probably should. Why aren't you? He tilted his head slightly. Because you don't scare me as much as this world does. Her breath caught, so soft it could have been imagined. For all her power, she didn't know what to do with someone who wouldn't bend. Power meant little when it met someone unwilling to be owned. She stepped around him in a slow arc, like a lion deciding whether its prey was worth the hunt. You're either very brave or very foolish. Or both, Elias said. When she stopped behind him, the sound of her voice wrapped around him like smoke. You interest me, Elias Vance. That is both a gift and a curse. He didn't turn. I'm not interested in being your pet. You misunderstand, she said. I don't keep pets. I keep truth. That made him face her. The way she said it wasn't a threat, it was an admission. For a moment, the layers of empire thinned, and he glimpsed something beneath. Not just a queen but a woman who had spent her life being lied to. You want me to tell you the truth, Elias said. What? You have an empire for that. Empires are built on obedience, not truth, Serafina replied. My advisors tell me what I want to hear. My nobles tell me what keeps them alive. You, she gestured at him, something like disbelief softening her tone. You told me I have nothing to offer you. No one has ever said that to me. He almost pitied her then. Almost. Her steps carried her back toward the throne, but she didn't sit. You will stay aboard this ship. You will be close enough for me to hear when I want to know something real. Speak freely. You are under my protection. He didn't move. Protection isn't the same as freedom. Her expression didn't change, but the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Be grateful, Elias Vance. Most who defy me do not get either. One of the courtiers stepped forward, his jeweled collar gleaming. Your radiance, this is unwise. He's no one. The queen turned her gaze on the man. The courtier fell silent as if struck. She didn't need to say a word. Power didn't always shout. When she looked back at Elias, the faintest trace of something human lingered in her eyes. From now on, when I want the truth, I will come to you. Whether you like it or not. I don't plan on kneeling. Good, she said. I have enough men who do. The guards moved to escort him out. He caught one last glimpse of her as the great doors closed behind him. Serafina Valerie stood alone in the golden light, surrounded by power that could crush galaxies, yet looking for the briefest instant, like someone who envied the man with nothing. Elias didn't know why she had chosen him. But he understood one thing clearly as the doors sealed with a hiss. Whatever this was, it wasn't about mercy. It was about hunger, hers not for conquest but for something no empire could give her. The days aboard the Imperial flagship blurred into a rhythm Elias could neither predict nor control. There was no sunrise, only the slow rotation of artificial light across ceilings made of glass and metal. He was given quarters more luxurious than any home he'd ever known, walls that shimmered like living pearl, air that smelled faintly of ozone and myrrh, but comfort only made him restless. He wasn't meant to be surrounded by beauty that came at the cost of obedience. Guards shadowed him at all hours. They said it was for his safety, but the way their hands lingered near their weapons told another story. When he spoke, they didn't answer. When he asked questions, they stared straight ahead. Silence was the language of this ship, and he was quickly learning to speak it. Every few days, Serafina summoned him. She never called for him at the same hour, never with warning. The door would slide open and a voice would say, "The Empress requests your presence," and Elias would find himself walking through corridors that curved like the inside of a great serpent. Each time he told himself to speak less, to keep his distance. Each time he failed. She always received him in a smaller chamber, far from the throne room, round, sunlit, adorned not with gold but with growing vines that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light. Here she dismissed her guards. Here the queen became almost human. One evening as they sat across from each other, she asked, "Do you know why empires fall?" Elias studied her carefully. Because they forget who built them. A slow, thoughtful smile touched her lips. "You speak as though you've seen it happen." "I've seen it happen to people," he said. "And people are small empires. They fall the same way." For a moment she said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then she leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the viewport where stars swam by like schools of silver fish. "I have ruled for 12 years. I have been betrayed 6 times, survived 4 assassination attempts, and signed away more lives than I can count. Every morning I ask myself if the galaxy is better for my rule, and every night I decide to ask again tomorrow." Elias didn't know if she wanted comfort or truth, but she had chosen him for the latter. "If you have to ask," he said quietly, "you already know the answer." Her eyes found him again, sharp and unflinching. "You don't fear me even when you insult me." "I don't insult you," he replied. "I just stop pretending." Something softened in her gaze. "That's precisely why you're still alive." He almost smiled at that. Almost. The tension between them had shifted into something else, an unspoken curiosity neither dared name. She seemed to crave his honesty the way a starving person craved warmth. And he, against his better judgment, began to crave her presence for reasons he couldn't articulate. Their conversations grew longer, drifting from politics to philosophy to fragments of their pasts. She told him about her coronation, the endless ceremonies, the crowds chanting her name while her father's body was still warm. He told her about mining shafts that collapsed because corporations cut corners, about friends who disappeared into debt prisons. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, yet somehow they met in the middle, in the shared exhaustion of people who had stopped believing in what surrounded them. But not everyone shared the queen's fascination. Whispers spread through the ship like static. Advisors muttered that the empress was being manipulated, that a man from a dust colony had bewitched her judgment. One afternoon as Elias passed through the observation deck, a noble in ceremonial silver robes stepped into his path. "You found yourself in dangerous company, off-worlder," the man said. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "The empress tires quickly of her amusements. You do well to disappear before she does." Elias met his eyes. "And if I don't?" The noble smiled thinly. "Then someone might decide to help her forget you." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had spent his life surrounded by men who believed threat was the same thing as power. When he returned to his quarters that night, he found one of his guards reassigned and a faint scent of chemical residue near the ventilation grate. He didn't sleep. When Serafina summoned him the next day, he didn't wait for her to speak. "Someone wants me gone." "I know," she said. He blinked. "And?" She turned from the viewport, eyes steady. "And I've already dealt with it." "What does that mean?" "It means you're still breathing." He stared at her, a mix of disbelief and unease rising in his chest. "You can't solve everything with fear." Her tone cooled. "Fear keeps order. Fear kills truth," he countered. "If people only tell you what you want to hear, you'll never know when the ground under your empire starts to crack." For the first time, anger flickered in her eyes, but not toward him. She turned away, her hands tightening at her sides. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see it every day? Then stop building with cracks," Elias said. Her silence was sharp enough to cut. He regretted the words the moment they left him, but she didn't lash out. Instead, she exhaled slowly, like someone letting go of a blade they'd been gripping too long. "You remind me," she said at last, "of the person I was before the crown decided who I must be." "You're still that person," he said. She gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "No. That girl is long dead. You're just too stubborn to see her tomb." She dismissed him then, but not unkindly. He turned to go, the weight of their exchange lingering like smoke. As the doors opened, a flash of motion caught his eye, one of the guards raising his hand too quickly, the glint of a concealed weapon. Instinct moved faster than thought. Elias lunged. The blast sizzled through the air where Serafina had been standing a heartbeat earlier, scorching the metal wall. He collided with her, shoving her out of the line of fire. The shot caught him across the shoulder, the impact searing through skin and bone. Pain bloomed white-hot. The guards reacted at once, tackling the assassin before another shot could fire. When it was over, the room reeked of ozone and blood, Elias staggered, one hand pressed to the wound. Serafina was already beside him, her composure cracked for the first time. "You fool," she breathed. "Why would you?" "Habit," he said through gritted teeth. "I've been dodging death my whole life." She pressed her hand against his, steadying the bleeding. Her eyes shone, not with tears but with something fiercer. "You could have died." He managed a wry smile. "Wouldn't be the first time someone tried." Her hand trembled slightly. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. "Now they'll think I care." He looked at her, pale but steady. "Do you?" She didn't answer. Not with words. But she didn't let go of his hand either. Outside, alarms echoed through the corridors, signaling lockdown. Inside, silence fell again, except for the faint rhythm of two uneven breaths, and the quiet understanding that nothing between them could ever return to what it was before. The medbay hummed with the low, steady rhythm of machines designed to keep fragile bodies alive in a world that had forgotten fragility. Elias drifted in and out of awareness, the antiseptic air sharp against the back of his throat. Every breath tasted like metal. A translucent field pulsed softly over his shoulder where the burn had carved through flesh, knitting muscle and nerve with cold precision. He didn't like the silence here. It felt too clean, too careful, like a pause before something inevitable. He opened his eyes to find her there. Serafina stood beside his bed, still in the same robe she had worn the night of the attack, streaked with smoke and scorched along the hem. She hadn't left. She didn't look like an empress at this hour, she looked like a woman running out of ways to be untouchable. The guards at the doorway shifted uneasily, uncertain whether to avert their eyes or salute. Her presence here unsettled everyone. "You're awake," she said. "Unfortunately," Elias rasped. His throat ached from the breathing tube they'd used. "Would have been easier if I wasn't." Her brow tightened. "Don't say that." "It's true." She moved closer. "You stopped a plasma bolt with your shoulder. Most people would be dead." "I've been called stubborn." A trace of something like a smile flickered at the corner of her mouth but didn't last. Her gaze lingered on the wound, then returned to his face. "You could have let it hit me." He didn't flinch. "Didn't feel like letting you die." "Why?" she asked, so quietly the machines nearly swallowed the word. "Because you matter," he said simply. "Even if you don't see it." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was dense, heavy with the weight of something neither of them had dared name until now. Her hand hovered for a moment, uncertain, then rested lightly on the edge of the bed, not touching him, but near enough that the air between them felt charged. "They'll use this against me," she said. "They'll say I've gone soft. That I've let a commoner become a weakness." "Maybe they're right," Elias said. Her eyes snapped to him, a flash of the queen returning. "Careful." "I'm not mocking you," he said. "I'm telling the truth. Power makes you easy to hate. Loving anything makes you easier to break. And people like your nobles, they live to break what they fear." The anger in her expression faltered, revealing something raw beneath. "I can't afford to be broken." "No one can," Elias said. "But we all break anyway." She turned away from him, crossing to the viewport. Beyond the glass, a nearby nebula burned violet and blue, its light cutting across her face like fractured glass. "The Grand Duke has gathered half the High Council behind him," she said. "He's calling for a vote of removal." Elias's pulse spiked. "He's trying to unseat you." "Or kill me," she said almost casually. "Whichever is easier." He pushed himself up despite the sharp protest in his shoulder. "Then stop him." "It isn't that simple." "Yes it is," he snapped. "You have fleets, armies, everything. Crush him." She looked at him then, and the fatigue in her eyes was worse than any wound. "That's what they expect. A tyrant crushing another challenge. Every rebellion, every whisper, every accusation, always the same. And I've always done exactly that. And do you know what happens after, Elias? Nothing changes. The fear grows. The silence deepens. And I become the thing they already decided I was." He hadn't seen her like this before. Not as a ruler. Not as a symbol. As a person caught in the teeth of her own crown. The realization cut deeper than he wanted to admit. "So what do you do?" he asked. She stepped closer again, but this time there was no distance in her eyes. "I don't know. That's the part no one ever admits. The Empress doesn't know how to save the Empire." "You don't need to save it," he said. "You need to change it." She stared at him as though he'd spoken in a language no one else dared use. "Change it. Every empire falls eventually. Maybe yours doesn't have to fall like the others. Maybe it can bend instead." Her breath caught almost soundlessly. "Bend. You're already different," Elias said. "You listen. You ask questions. That terrifies them because they've built everything on the idea that power never listens." She lowered her gaze. "Listening doesn't stop bullets." "No," he said softly. "But it can stop the need to fire them." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned fully to him. "If I choose this path, Elias, I will make enemies I can't unmake." "You already have," he replied. "At least make it mean something." Her jaw tightened. She was weighing the crown against the world, power against something far more dangerous. Hope. The hum of the med bay filled the space between them, but her decision was being forged in silence. Finally she spoke. "When I first saw you, I thought you were a threat to be contained." "I'm very containable," Elias said dryly. "No," she said, a faint edge of warmth in her voice. "You're not. You're a storm I let inside the gates. And now I can't pretend the walls were ever strong." She reached out then, not as a queen bestowing favor but as a woman making a choice. Her hand found his, light but steady, fingers warm against his bandaged skin. "If I do this," she whispered, "I can't promise you safety." He met her gaze. "I never asked for safety." The alarms cut through the air like a blade, shrill and unforgiving. A voice cracked over the intercom. "Emergency broadcast. Rebel fleet inbound. Estimated time to intercept, 40 minutes. The spell broke but not the thread between them. Serafina didn't release his hand immediately. When she finally did, her expression had hardened, not into the mask of a ruler, but into the resolve of someone who had chosen a side. "They're coming for you," Elias said. Her eyes blazed with something fierce. "Then they'll find I no longer stand alone." She turned toward the door, the weight of her empire on her shoulders and something new burning behind her steps. Elias watched her leave, the distant pulse of alarms chasing after her, and for the first time since arriving on this ship, he didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt like a spark in the center of a storm about to break. The stars were no longer a backdrop, they were a battlefield. The black expanse beyond the viewport throbbed with the electric pulse of war. Rebel cruisers streaked through the void like hunting blades, their engines cutting through the dark with crimson light. Sirens howled through the Empress's flagship, their sharp wails echoing through the steel corridors like a heartbeat gone frantic. Elias stood on the command bridge, one arm bandaged and bound tightly against his side, the pain a quiet reminder that he didn't belong here. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't royalty. He was just a man who had made a choice, and now that choice stood between an empire and the abyss. The doors hissed open. Serafina strode in, dressed not in the ceremonial silk of a monarch but in the black armor of a commander. It caught the starlight, making her seem less human and more like something forged from the galaxy itself. She carried no crown. She didn't need one. The crown was in the way she moved, in the fire in her eyes. "All decks report ready," said Admiral Kale from the helm. His face was carved from discipline and old loyalties, but even he couldn't hide the sliver of doubt flickering in his gaze. "The rebel fleet outnumbers us 2-1. "Then we'll make them believe they're already losing," Serafina replied, voice steady, almost serene. Elias stepped forward. "And if they don't?" She met his gaze. "Then we make them." There was no room for hesitation now. The Grand Duke's fleet had been gathering for months, feeding off the quiet rot beneath her rule, whispering about restoring the true order. They wanted her dead. They wanted to roll the galaxy back into chains. And she had chosen to fight not from the throne but here, beside the man who had nothing and had given her everything real. A sharp tremor rattled the deck as the first salvo struck the outer shields. Blue light flared across the viewports like ripples on water. The admiral barked orders, crews scrambled, and the bridge came alive with controlled chaos. But Serafina stood unmoving at the center, watching the storm approach. "You still have a chance to run," she said quietly to Elias without looking at him. He stepped closer, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You gave me a place to stand," he said. "I'm not leaving you to fight for it alone." Her breath caught for the briefest moment, but she didn't turn away. "Then stand with me," she whispered. The tactical display painted a brutal picture. 3 enemy dreadnoughts closing in on their flanks, fighter squadrons cutting through the void like flocks of razors, and the Grand Duke's flagship, the Sovereign's Wrath, looming like a black sun at the center. Every line of that ship was a statement. Power without restraint. The first wave hit hard. Their forward shields shuddered, alarms bled into each other and the hull groaned. But Serafina didn't flinch. She raised a hand, gave a single, cold command, and the flagship responded like it was an extension of her will. Turrets roared. Ion cannons split the darkness with ribbons of light. One of the rebel frigates went down in a silent bloom of flame. The admiral cast a sidelong glance. Direct hits on enemy support vessel. They didn't expect us to hit back this fast. Good, Serafina said. Let them feel it. A calm chime crackled to life. A face appeared on the hollow display, a man with a patrician sneer carved into his features, cloaked in the silver of old nobility. The Grand Duke. Empress, he said, his voice smooth as venom. How far you've fallen, standing on your bridge like a common soldier. And yet, Serafina replied evenly, I'm still standing. He smirked. For now. Surrender and I'll make your execution swift. Resist and I'll burn every world that ever swore fealty to you. You've already lost. The council is mine. Your people will follow the stronger hand. Elias took a step forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Funny thing about stronger hands, he said. They're always the first to break when they think no one can push back. The Duke's gaze shifted to him, confusion flaring into disdain. A human drifter? This is who you've chained your fate to? Pathetic. Serafina smiled, a slow, dangerous curve. No, she said. This is who I've chosen. The channel cut before the Duke could reply. The next volley struck harder. The ship rocked. Sparks rained from an overhead conduit, filling the air with the smell of scorched metal. Elias gripped the console. Tell me you've got a plan. Not a plan, she said, a choice. She pointed at the tactical display. Their flagship is overconfident. They're pushing their flanks too far forward. If we break through here, she traced a line between two escort ships, we can board the Sovereign's wrath and cut the head off the rebellion before it consumes everything. That's suicide, Admiral Kale said. It's necessary, Serafina replied. Elias locked eyes with her, reading the storm beneath her calm. You're going yourself. She nodded once. If the Empire burns, it will not be because its queen hid behind walls. He didn't argue. He simply said, then I'm going with you. Minutes later, the boarding vessel tore through the chaos of battle. Plasma fire licked at its hull, enemy fighters screamed past like furious comets, and the void boiled around them. Elias sat beside her in the jump seats, the vibration of the engines thrumming through his bones. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They didn't need to. The impact of docking hit like a hammer. The airlock breached, pressure equalized, and the ramp dropped into a storm of smoke and shouting. Elite rebel guards waited, rifles raised. Serafina drew her blade, a blade older than most star systems, its edge whispering through the air, and charged first. She moved like gravity belonged to her alone, each strike a calculated, elegant execution. Elias followed close, a stolen rifle braced against his shoulder, each shot echoing his heartbeat. They fought not as ruler and subject but as two sparks igniting the same fire. They reached the core corridor. Beyond it lay the command deck. And the Grand Duke. The Duke stood alone when they entered, as if certain no one would reach him. His blade gleamed like frozen lightning. You could have been remembered as a ruler, he said softly. Now you'll be remembered as a warning. Serafina's grip tightened on her sword. Then let the warning be loud. The duel that followed wasn't graceful. It was brutal. He struck with the rage of entitlement, she with the precision of someone who'd had everything and refused to let it be stolen again. Elias circled the room, trading fire with the last of the Duke's men, keeping them from overwhelming her. Sparks lit the air as blade met blade. The Duke lunged. She sidestepped, pivoted, and drove her blade into the gap beneath his ribs. His breath caught in a wet gasp. For the first time he looked mortal. She leaned close. The stars don't belong to you, she said. They never did. He fell. Silence filled the command deck like a held breath. The rebel fleet faltered without their leader, formations shattering as news of his death spread like wildfire through their comms. Outside, the flagship's guns fell quiet. Serafina stood over the fallen Duke, her blade dripping with light, her chest heaving. She turned to Elias. There was blood on her armor, fire in her eyes, and something new beneath it all, something alive. It's over, he said. She shook her head. No. It's just beginning. He stepped toward her, the distant glow of retreating ships reflecting in his eyes. Then let's begin it together. Her hand found his, firm, certain, not as a queen accepting a vow but as a woman making one of her own. Outside, the stars burned on, silent witnesses to an empire reborn not from conquest, but from choice. And somewhere in the dark between galaxies, the future stirred.